Well, the first 30 minutes of this game, I was frustrated, I was upset, and I had reached the point of acceptance that the Washington Huskies season, their historic season, was not going to end in a championship because their defense is not championship level. And the offense would have to score on every single drive in order for them to win. Basically, throw out the punter because the punter was going to be useless. And then the second half happened. The Washington Huskies defeat the Utah Utes 35-28 on a rainy, windy day on Montlake. Anyone that's been to Seattle, lived in Seattle, knows these games and these days happen in November. Very, very typical. We get a game like this at least once or twice a year where it's windy, where it becomes difficult to throw the ball. It becomes difficult to kick the ball. But I was ready to start this reaction podcast negatively, but the other people that do reactions that start it that way after a win, I don't really like it because it spoils the mood, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start positively. And by positively, I mean I'm going to start by talking about the Washington offense. Michael Penix, Heisman hopeful, 24 for 42, 332 yards, and 2 touchdowns on a overcast, windy, rainy day. I'll take it. He still has issues of overthrows, and he overthrows some open guys, which whenever I see that, I think to myself, man, Ryan Grubb is the real superstar of this team, their offensive coordinator, because he is scheming guys open nearly every play. And Penix does his job, which is be able to, at points, evade pressure and find them. And with decisiveness. So, on a day like this where there was weather impacting the game, they were lucky to have a running back. And it only took him 8 weeks to find one, and his name is Dillon Johnson, and he's a transfer. He ran for 104 yards in this one, but I didn't do a recap after the USC game. He ran for over 200 yards in that one, broke all kinds of records. Said in the pregame today he hadn't had a 100-yard game since high school, I believe. So now he has back-to-back games. He could have had more in this one if not for the offensive line. Offensive line had a little bit of a mixed day. We'll get into that in a little bit. Tybo Rogers, Will Nixon also had good games. Tybo Rogers, 2 for 24. Will Nixon, 1 carry, 13 yards. And for the receivers, how about this stat line? Rome Odunze, 3 catches, 2 touchdowns for 111 yards. The superstar of this team. The first-round pick for sure. And the underrated superstar of this one is going to be Jalen Polk for me, because even though he only had 4 catches, 55 yards, they were huge catches. If you remember that one that he had on, I think, 3rd or 4th down, he had to fight off the defensive back, and the safety was coming as well. Strong with 2 hands, held on to it. Huge play, and he continues to make huge plays and be pivotal for this team, especially in the absence of Jalen McMillan. Jack Westover, 7 catches, 64 yards, had some really big ones. I remember he also had a silly penalty after he made a big catch. Germie Bernard has really stepped up in the absence of McMillan, and I think to myself, man, if McMillan was on this team and they had all these other guys, it'd be even better than it is. But he takes advantage of his opportunities here. 6 catches, 63 yards. Dillon Johnson got a couple catches for 28 yards. Devin Culp, 2 catches, 11 yards. It was all basically on that screen, and he could have been the lowercase goat of this game because he dropped a very easy 2-point conversion that he should not drop. I mean, that's tight ends. You usually expect them to make those catches, especially a guy like Devin Polk, who made an incredible catch last week. Washington put up how many points in the first half? 24 points in the first half. They scored on nearly every drive. Really, really, really good. And this Utah defense is the number 1 defense in the Pac-12. So coming into this, I was a little bit apprehensive, but going by what you saw in this game, they didn't look like the number 1 defense. They kept showing their defensive coordinator on the sideline, and he was sending a lot of pressure throughout the game, but the offensive line was equal to it. And the audibles that Washington made to provide more coverage with tight ends and running backs, really good job. Dillon Johnson got one kind of holding penalty. It was a little bogus. Man, I mean, the pressure, it was like a little wall that they had in front of him for most of the game. I am truly impressed by this offense, this 10-0 Huskies offense, 7-0 in conference. It is like no Huskies offense I've ever seen, even more impressive than the Jake Browning offense, all things considered, because Jake Browning had a cheat code in John Ross being faster than everybody else, and Dante Pettis, an expert return specialist, but really the at the crux of this is Michael Penix being a league above Jake Browning. So nothing but good things to say about this Huskies offense. And on defense for the Utes, the name that stood out to me was Kareem Reed. Several times I saw him out there. He was making plays, made it a little bit tough for this team at times. I mean, they didn't score in the fourth quarter. Some of that was because the wind had started to ramp up in the fourth. But as you can see, Utah got no interceptions and basically no fumble recoveries, except they did recover one on offense. And that's going to give me my signal to pivot into this defense, which is undoubtedly the Achilles heel of the 2023 Washington Huskies football team. I mentioned at the beginning of this reaction podcast that the first 30 minutes of this game, the first half of this game, was absolutely a draining experience trying to make sense of how this Huskies defense could have no pride after seeing your offense go out there and make plays and be tough, and them just come out and have no pride at all. And they were, I'm going to sound like a broken record again, Utah was marching down the field with no resistance. It's the same thing that happened against USC, same thing that happened against Stanford. These past 3 games, it's been the same story. Bryson Barnes, who is their backup quarterback, it's a Cam Rising, who was a Heisman hopeful this year, not even playing. 267 yards, and it felt like a lot more than that. And they ran for 115, and it was spread out amongst a bunch of guys on this team. Vaki, that guy has speed. Devon Vele had 6 catches, 153 yards. I mean, couldn't do anything about him. And that first half was ugly. They put up 21 points in the second quarter. And the Huskies, it's kind of ironic, they put up the graphic that nobody in the country has scored more points in the second quarter than the Huskies. And then to go and allow a team to score 21 points on you in the second quarter really crystallizes the fact that this defense has a ton of issues. A ton of issues. One, tackling. In the first half, they kept diving at players without wrapping up, trying to make the big plays, not being fundamentally sound. Really, really, really need to fix that. And I'm going to go to the stats here. Eddie Ulofoshio, again, very solid as a linebacker, but really one of the important stats in this game here is they got 0 sacks. They got 4 tackles for loss, but they got 0 sacks. So, Bralen Trice and ZTF are bringing some pressure, but it's they're not completing the job. ZTF completed the job last week. He did a good job. Got to give him kudos. But this week, him and Bralen Trice, they're just not quite getting to the quarterback. And I know there's some discussion like, sacks are one of the most misguided stats to judge a player. But if you would to get at least 1 sack on this guy in the first half, it would have been a different game. And I cannot continue this podcast without mentioning number 11, Alfonso Tuputala, who had one of the most egregious plays in Husky history. I've seen other teams do it. I once shuddered to think if my team ever did that, how I would react, where he intercepted the ball, ran for 76 yards, and then dropped the ball at the 1-yard line before he scored a touchdown with nobody around him. In the most inexcusable play in football. I thought he should have been benched. I think he should maybe be benched for the next game for this for these malfeasance, essentially. And he's really lucky. He's really lucky that his defense backed him up and got a safety as a result of the Utes getting it on the 1-yard line, and the Huskies were able to get the ball back, but they never scored again. So he is really, really lucky that his defense backed him up, but that is an unforgivable play. And I want to see him after the game be contrite about this, because you cannot do that. You cannot do that in a game with these kind of stakes after you had played so poorly, looking like the worst defense in the country in the first half. Final point. The reason why the Huskies won this game is because, if you're watching on YouTube, what you see here, the Huskies defense ended up allowing 0 points in the second half. And that's a kudos to the team all around. That's kudos to the weather that helped us out. That's also kudos to the offense, where the Utes had to go for it on several 4th downs and not get it because they knew that the Washington Huskies were going to go march down the field and score. Now, what actually happened is the Huskies only scored 11 points in the second half, and all of them were in the third quarter. But the fear of that offense that they saw in the first half made them go for it on 4th down continuously. So, kudos to who got the second pick. They're not showing who got the second pick. I think it was Hampton that got that second pick. And there was another guy that had a pass breakup early in the game that was really, really big. Nunley, Vincent Nunley. That was a huge pass breakup. That could have been a touchdown if he didn't make that play. So there are individual moments where you see that there are individual players on defense that can make plays. But as a cohesive unit, this defensive coordinator needs to rally everyone together. Practice tackling, practice form tackling, not diving, wrapping up. Practice the integrity of your gaps and practice communication in terms of coverage, because these guys have been playing together for a while. Jabbar Muhammad and Elijah Jackson. Elijah Jackson, by the way, was the biggest culprit of not wrapping up and tackling. Got to work on that. But those two guys especially, and then you add Nunley, you add Hampton, and some of these other defensive backs, you got to get on the same page of coverage, because that one touchdown, I believe, or that really long play, he just ran right past the safety, and you got to be better than that if you're a free safety. Okay, Huskies, 10-0. Everything still ahead of them. Unfortunately, Miami had a chance to beat Florida State today, didn't. Penn State had a chance to beat Michigan today. Horrible James Franklin. Didn't do it. Made some terrible calls. And their quarterback, when I watched that game, when I watched their quarterback, the Penn State quarterback, I am so thankful to be a Husky fan and have Michael Penix on my team. And we are spoiled. If you're a Huskies fan, watch some of these other quarterbacks out there. We are spoiled to have Michael Penix. And we're going to miss him big time next year, now that we're used to this standard. We're going to see about Georgia. Hopefully they fall. Ohio State, I'm not confident, but Georgia has a chance against Ole Miss to fall, so really hoping that happens. And, of course, you have the Ohio State versus Michigan game that somebody has to lose. I hope that doesn't end in a tie. That would be worst-case scenario, if it can. Michigan seems motivated with this Harbaugh thing. So we'll see. That's going to be a huge game. One of the biggest games, one of the most anticipated games in years, especially if the Huskies keep winning that Ohio State-Michigan game. Okay, going to wrap this up here. Everything's still ahead of the Huskies. Everything's still ahead of you. Offense, amazing, historic. Defense, you got it done in the second half, but that first half was one of the worst I've ever seen, so you must clean it up. Until next time, go Huskies. Have a fantastic day, football fans.